Welcome to the Rever Rundown. Grab a coffee and get ready to learn and unlearn a few things. We're going to talk about something that women suffer with silently. Why do I know they suffer with it silently? I've been one of those women. I've seen it in my practice. I hear about it all the time. Women kind of talk about it at parties like this. They're like, do you ever have this? Do you go through that? And they're like, oh my God, man, me too. We're going to talk about it out loud today. And it's called pelvic floor dysfunction. And it seems like, yeah, the answer is to just do Kegels. Of course, you pee when you jump. You had a baby. This is normal. You have to live like this. No, you don't. It's actually abnormal to pee when we jump. It's just common and we just grin and bear it and we handle it. But I think we're living in a time where we don't have to do that anymore. So let's talk about it. Let's put it out into the open. Let's take away any stigma and let's actually say, oh my God, you pee your pants too when you jump? You don't have an incomplete bowel movement? Guess what? That doesn't mean that you're constipated. That could mean that your pelvic floor is not working the way that it needs to. It impacts both men and women, but for today, we're going to focus on women. We're going to talk about what pelvic floor dysfunction is, what it can look like, how it impacts different aspects of people's lives, and then some key takeaways of what you need to know and what you can do today after listening to this episode. Pelvic floor dysfunction isn't just peeing in your pants, though. It's a multi-system problem. It affects the whole body. It can be caused by your pelvic floor, which, by the way, is a group of teeny tiny muscles that all work together to hold up your organs. It can happen because they're either too tight or too weak. And oftentimes women are told, just do Kegels or buy this thing online and insert it into your vagina and it'll do wonders. But guess what? It's way more nuanced than that. And it's not 5 Kegels and you're done. No, this is a complex problem that impacts many, many aspects of a woman's life. Let's look at the actual data of how it can impact a woman's physical health. I'm going to list a series of symptoms and I'm going to tell you guys the percentage of women that actually experience this. So urinary incontinence occurs in about 55 to 56% of women. Common, not normal. Pelvic organ prolapse. That occurs in 14 to 52% of women. Fecal incontinence, meaning you cannot hold in a bowel movement. That occurs in 10% of women. Chronic pelvic pain. I don't have a statistic on that one, but I know I see it in my practice. And women are just told to have a glass of wine. Common, not normal. Something that I found so interesting when I was preparing for this podcast to share this information with you was that our breathing is actually impacted by our pelvic floor. Something so basic, something that we need to live, a deep breath. If your pelvic floor is having dysfunction, your breathing is impacted. Women report reduced mobility. They avoid activities, jumping on the trampoline with your kid, dancing. All of these things are impacted. Their tasks are limited. If they have fecal incontinence, they don't want to leave the house. And then something so important for relationships, for joy, sexual pleasure. So many women report pain with sex or sexual dysfunction. And this can also be a symptom of pelvic floor dysfunction. Not only does pelvic floor dysfunction, I'm going to call it PFD, impact our physical lives, but there are psychological impacts as well. And I think those could be even more profound. Women report fear, insecurity, embarrassment, social isolation, impacts to their employment, to their leisure. There are feelings of shame, higher rates of depression and anxiety, reports of low self-esteem. And we're not even looking at the bigger impact of that. When you have social withdrawal, depression, that's going to impact your cognitive function. That's going to impact your longevity. So pelvic floor dysfunction is not just like you're peeing your pants, you're staying at home. No, it impacts your longevity. It impacts your wellness. Women report that it impacts their quality of life. Women with pelvic floor dysfunction say that they have lower quality of life, with prolapse of their organs causing the biggest impact, and then the colorectal and anal symptoms causing the next biggest impact. Imagine not being able to hold your bowel movement or not having complete ability to empty your bowels. It's so frustrating. And then the last symptom that really impacts quality of life is urinary incontinence, running, playing, things that bring joy. are significantly impacted, which then in turn, again, impacts longevity, impacts your 80, 90, 100-year-old future self because you're isolated, you're withdrawn, you're depressed, you have incontinence, and so we're looking at what this does in the long term. In the short term, sure, normal, everyone does it. No, you can address this. You can work to improve this. So let's look at how we can do that, because we want a long, full, robust life. Let's talk about the treatment. Treatment is essential to preventing long-term, chronic, recurrent disabilities like infections and permanent pelvic floor changes over time. I believe, this is my opinion, I believe that we can always work towards a solution. I don't think this is forever. I think there are solutions. I think there are things that you can do and your symptoms can be much more manageable, but you have to actually take these steps. Don't let fear paralyze you to think that you need to stay exactly where you are right now. That's not reality. You have power and there are things that you can do. So let's go. Pelvic floor physical therapy is the number one intervention. Is it covered by insurance? Most of the time, not. That sucks. I get it. Unfortunately, our medical system needs to change. Our insurance systems need to change. The long-term effects of pelvic floor dysfunction are huge, but pelvic floor physical therapy is going to be the first thing that you can do. There was one study that showed that women who have stress incontinence is basically like you laugh and you pee, or you jump and you pee, that when they did 8 contractions of Kegels 3 times a day, there was a 74% cure rate of this stress incontinence. So that's pretty cool. I mean, obviously, yes, you need to be evaluated by a pelvic floor physical therapist to say, do we need Kegels? Is it because you have a weak pelvic floor or a tight pelvic floor? But this study showed that there was a 74% cure rate in women who did Kegels 3 times a day for 8 contractions. So I would say start there. Then there's pharmacotherapy, aka medications. So there's a bunch of different medicines that can be trialed, and you're going to want to talk about these with your medical provider. I'm going to list off some of them so you can have an idea of what you would talk about. So for overactive bladder, there is a treatment with anticholinergic medications or beta sympathomimetic drugs. And they basically will kind of dry out the urine. Then there's another option like anti-anxiety medications, SSNRIs, can help with stress incontinence as well. And then for pelvic pain, we can try again the same SSNRIs or gabapentin. However, that first intervention is always going to be pelvic floor physical therapy. But as a mom of 2 kids who had natural vaginal deliveries, no one told me after I gave birth that I needed pelvic floor physical therapy. There's other additional interventions that can be used aside from physical therapy and pharmacological treatments like medications. But oftentimes, this in particular one that I'm going to mention is called a pessary. Sorry, that's a tricky word for me. Pessaries. They can help support prolapse. And that's something that you get fitted with by a physical therapist. There's also the option to trial local estrogen therapy for urogenital prolapse. It can help strengthen the pelvic floor muscles. And this is something that I often will prescribe for my postpartum or postmenopausal female patients while they're working with a physical therapist. And we find that it works well to support these symptoms. There's other interventional procedures like trigger point injections for pain, Botox for overactive bladder, and then potentially the last resort would be surgery. What is the bottom line here, though? I don't want you to feel shame if you have any of these symptoms. They're very common. They're not normal, but they're common. And you have the option to seek therapy like pelvic floor physical therapy and get treatment. Be loud, be vocal, seek support. Even potentially some of these treatments could be covered by insurance, but you need to advocate for yourself. You need to say, hey, I know this is not normal. It might be common, but it's not normal. And I'm thinking about my future self and how this will impact my longevity. Early recognition and treatment are essential. If you're starting to experience these symptoms now, and you're like listening to this episode and you're thinking, hello, this is me. What's going on here? I thought this was just part of life. No, it's not. Go, run, get treatment. You don't need to wait. You don't need to suffer. You don't need to wait until it becomes impossible and forces you to be socially isolated. And then my last piece of advice is going to be to find a specialist to work with. Ultimately, it's your health. You have power. I'm here to give you education, but you have a voice. I want you to use it. I want you to advocate for yourself, for your longevity, for your health, for your wellness. Be loud. Be a squeaky wheel. Get the care you deserve. Thanks for tuning in and hanging out with me today. I hope you learned at least one thing that might actually move the needle in your health. Remember, it's about progress and not perfection. If you take even one tiny nugget from today and actually use it, you're already ahead of yesterday's you. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, follow, and leave a review or a question. Every bit of engagement helps this content reach more people, and we're on a mission to help people live their healthiest lives. If you're interested in becoming a patient at Rever Wellness, you can apply directly on our website. See show notes below for more details. See you next week for another rundown. This podcast and its accompanying materials, including show notes, transcripts, emails, social media posts, and downloadable resources, are provided for general informational and educational purposes only. The content does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or any other professional healthcare services, nor does it include the provision of medical advice. Listening to this podcast or engaging with its content does not establish a provider-patient relationship between you and the hosts, guests, or affiliated entities. The information presented is not intended to be a substitute for individualized medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from a licensed healthcare professional. You should not disregard, avoid, or delay seeking medical care because of something you have heard or read in the podcast. Always consult your qualified healthcare provider regarding any medical condition, symptoms, or before making any changes to your healthcare medications, supplements, diet, exercise, sleep, or lifestyle practices.